Welcome to the Altered Call podcast. We've discussed in great detail listening to God, but what happens when He finally speaks? How do we go about interpreting His words, and what do we do about them? My name is Pillischafske. I believe that all children deserve to be smiled at. I believe that truth feels different, and I believe that you were uniquely created to reflect God's glory in the world. One of my favorite soapboxes is the idea that critical failure can be avoided if we are willing to learn the lessons before hitting the wall. In reality, it is common for something terrible to happen in a man's life, and then he is forced to make drastic changes and learn the lesson accordingly. However, I am utterly convinced that God gives each of us the opportunity to learn those lessons and voluntarily avoid hitting the wall at many points before the eventual crash. We simply don't listen or aren't willing to understand what He is saying. Today I'm going to teach you how. We've spent a lot of time talking about listening to God and attempting to leverage His voice. Today we are going to discuss what to do when you hear something. In a perfect world, you would process through a trigger in the company of other believers, so that you can leverage their wisdom and insights towards a faster and more thorough understanding. I work with a team called Warrior's Path, where we both facilitate groups and train leaders to lead men through exactly this type of interaction. One of the tools that I have created for that group is what we call the battle plan. The battle plan works both as a template for new leaders to facilitate the exploration of triggers, as well as a starting point for people that for one reason or another are inclined to do the work on their own. A free copy of this worksheet can be downloaded at my website, alteredcall.com, and I recommend having access to that form for this particular episode. The worksheet itself is overkill for a lot of the triggers that you will encounter, but for people that are inexperienced in the process, it ensures that none of the steps are skipped over. I should also mention that for particularly large triggers, or in situations where one trigger leads to another, it is not uncommon for you to go through the process multiple times before you reach the end. As a reminder, the use of the battle plan and responding to God in this way is paired with the framework of the discipleship path. The intended approach is that the discipleship path is the foundation of good stewardship that you maintain during more normal times, and then you deviate from that baseline in instances where you feel a particular call of God. Starting at the top of the page, write down the trigger itself. As a reminder, the trigger will be something that calls your attention to God's hand in your life. A vision, a voice, a dream, a strong feeling, an idea that gets stuck in your head, a reoccurring theme, or a particular challenge in life. Anything that draws your attention in and means something deep and personal to you qualifies. Write that here. As we go, I'm going to give example for my own life. In this case, for the trigger, I'm going to say, I just yelled at my son, and I don't like how it feels afterwards. Your first impression is next, and this part is more important than you may be tempted to give it credit for. I want you to write down your gut reaction or first thoughts after receiving the trigger. Don't overthink it, just write something down. Sometimes the thing that you write here won't make any intuitive sense, but often this first impression will shine light in unexpected ways on what the actual issue is. Continuing with my example. My first impression is that I want to find a better way to relate to my son. I don't mind yelling if I have to, but in this case it felt unnecessary. Blind spots are next. It can actually be common to skip this step because often you don't know, but if you have a known weakness in the area of the trigger, put that here. Sometimes a trigger will point towards a lack of knowledge in a particular area or an insecurity given your unique background. We will attempt to address those weaknesses in the next step. For me, I tend to resort to yelling when I'm tired or stressed, so that is a known weakness. Once we have taken a first pass at understanding the problem, we can pursue useful information. Choose a couple of trusted sources and attempt to fill in any gaps in your understanding of the situation. This is where you would look up Bible verses, talk to friends to ask for advice, watch relevant YouTube videos, any source that would provide information on the topic at hand. In simple situations, this step is also often skipped, as no real information is necessary. I gave the example previously of driving home in a blizzard 3 times in 1 year and being frustrated. In that instance, I didn't need any new information. I just needed to make the decision not to put myself in that type of situation and draw boundaries appropriately to ensure that I was successful. As relates yelling at my son, I decided to talk to a few friends that had older kids and read a book on parenting. Now that we have gathered new information, we're going to write a more detailed exploration of the trigger. Do we know what it means yet? If not, then now is the time to get curious about it and explore the trigger in detail. Take a couple of guesses at what it could mean and see if any of those things resonate with you. Did any of the new information gathered point you towards a new belief or understanding of the situation? This is the part of the interaction where you benefit considerably from allowing someone else to have access to your thoughts. A skilled facilitator can help you to see things that you are likely to miss on your own. So if you are doing this solo, you need to pay attention to everything that you can and dig deep into the topic such that nothing is missed. In general, the vast majority of your time will be spent on this step. Here are a couple of hints that I give to new facilitators. 1. Follow threads. Your brain subconsciously connects ideas, so if you are thinking about or writing on the topic and your brain goes to something random, don't ignore it. It might be nothing, but often you will find something valuable if you get curious about why that idea popped up. 2. Pay attention to the words that you use. The way that you describe a situation often betrays how you feel about said situation. For example, if you say, "I had to go to the mall with my wife," that means a very different thing than, "My wife and I went to the mall." I'm not going to get into a lot of detail here, but there are a lot of words and phrases that will betray deeper significance if you pay attention to them. 3. Avoid addressing symptoms and avoid other people. Other people might be part of the trigger, but the message that we are attempting to uncover is always for you. The trigger made you feel a certain way, and we are trying to understand why. Similarly, the trigger itself isn't necessarily as important as the belief that it puts pressure on. We aren't trying to fix a problem. We are trying to learn the relevant lessons from the situation so that that problem doesn't recreate itself later on. Going back to my example, fixing the problem looks like apologizing to my son, and that is very easily done, but that isn't what I'm meant to learn from this. The problem is that I don't want to yell at my son, and yet I find myself in situations where that is the outcome in spite of my attempts to avoid it. I need to find a more generous way to approach situations with him, or I need to cut off the process earlier before things boil over. In this particular case, I felt underappreciated by him for all of the sacrifices that I have made in order to make his life better. He isn't yet old enough to understand how different his life is from that of some of his peers, but ultimately it isn't fair to put that expectation on him either way. I get to decide what I am willing to do for my kids independent of how they feel about it, and ultimately that is what caused me to boil over in this particular case. I wanted to be recognized for the sacrifices that I'm making for him in a situation where he isn't mature enough yet to see it. Maybe at some point in his 20s he'll come around and say thank you, but as a 7-year-old it seems insane to expect anything at all. So I need to adjust and act accordingly. I need to do whatever I'm willing to do without any emotional strings attached, for everyone's sake. Now that we have a thorough understanding of what the trigger is calling us to do, the backside of the page is where we put together our plan to get there. We begin by looking at our base camp. While it uses different language, this is identical in structure to the discipleship path. What we are going to do here is a quick inventory of each area of our life. Where are we overperforming, and where are we underperforming as relates our minimum standards? Once that is done, we go to the other side and define which areas need to be protected and which are able to generate some extra capacity in the short term while we pursue this calling. In my example, this is more of a mindset shift than anything else, but let's say that this led me to want to take a class on parenting. I would need to free up a night to do that, so some area of my life would be less served accordingly. Right now, I don't feel comfortable cutting back on any of my work nights, so I'd probably end up cutting back on one of the nights that I volunteer at church while I address this need. Then, when the class is over, I could return to business as usual. Potential outcomes is next, and this serves to define exactly what you think you stand to gain if you succeed in overcoming this obstacle, or lose in the event that it goes unaddressed. This step is most useful in cases where you are going to need to face down something significant in pursuit of victory. For both the win and the loss, I want those answers to be very reasonable and practical. I'm not interested in a massive victory, just a reasonable one. In my case, victory looks like fewer instances where I need to apologize to my son because I overreacted to something that he said. Losing looks like everything staying the same as normal. In the worst case field, I want you to imagine what happens if you never overcome this obstacle. In this instance, maybe my son grows up resenting me for being too hard on him or expecting too much in return. Notice how, in the example that I gave, no one died. I'm not taking it out of context or adding in other factors, just giving a realistic account of where I think this might end up naturally if it isn't corrected. Let's give a more serious example. Let's say that you are an alcoholic. In that case, it might be completely reasonable for your worst case scenario to be death or divorce or homelessness. Those are real extrapolations of the challenge faced, and that is the reason that this field exists, so that you can be honest about what future reality you are allowing to exist if you decide not to act. It's not meant necessarily to scare you, just to present you with an honest choice. Maybe you can fight the battle on your own. Maybe you can't. Either way, it helps to have someone coach you along the way. We call these champions. Honestly, in most cases, one champion is enough, but I wanted to provide some extra space in the event that it was helpful. What you are looking for here is someone that you know that is strong in this exact area. Everybody has different strengths and weaknesses. I believe that the best possible use of the church is to marry the strength of its believers to the struggles of the congregation. Find someone that you respect in the area that you are struggling with and ask them for help. Once you find a champion and approach them for help, you will want to negotiate the terms. Let them know exactly what you are looking for and then adjust accordingly based on what they feel qualified or interested in doing. I have had champions historically that I have been in daily contact with, and others where I would simply give them a casual update whenever we happen to see each other. This does not need to look a certain way to be effective. It often helps just to know that someone more qualified is accessible and willing to help as you go. Finally, we get to the battle plan itself. This is the step-by-step plan to take you from where you are to where you want to be. Detail exactly what you intend to do. Think through every aspect that you can predict and allow flexibility in the event of setbacks or partial failure. Set progressive goals if appropriate, and very clearly define what victory looks like. Once you are done, set a timeline. When do you commit to finishing this? In the event that a firm timeline is unknown, set a point in the future to reevaluate and assess your progress. Don't skip this step just because you don't know. Commit to a deadline that is reasonable and be willing to adjust. Once that time frame is reached, you will go back to this sheet and complete the recap and assessment portion. This step is crucial in helping you to understand God's voice. How did all of this actually play out? Do you still believe it was God's voice speaking to you? Did you grow over the time period? Did God show up in any fun or interesting ways along the path? Make notes, adjust your strategy, and move on accordingly. It is very common for triggers to nest together, so it might be appropriate to do 2 battle plans simultaneously, or for one battle plan to lead directly into another. If that is the case, simply do your best to balance the 2 as you progress towards the goals simultaneously, or consciously decide to put one off until the other is completed. I did my best to write out a list of all the triggers that I've addressed in the last several years of my life. And honestly, it reads like a list of memories from those times. Sometimes they showed up one at a time, and other times they stacked on top of each other. But several years removed, they are the things that stand out. One way or another, these triggers will define you as you progress through life. These are the things that are important to you. They are the things that draw you in. they are also the best opportunities to grow in wisdom and experience. Pay attention, learn the lessons, and maybe avoid hitting the wall. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Altered Call podcast. You can reach me by email using alex@alteredcall.com, or you can visit the website for additional information.